Today's daf is Chulin daf Kuf Yud Ches, and we are at the first wide line, 8 lines from the top of daf Kuf Yud Ches Amud Aleph. So yesterday we began the 9th parak in Masechtas Chulin, Parak Ha'or v'Haroitev, and as mentioned yesterday, Parak Ha'or v'Haroitev deals primarily with the halachos of Tumah v'Tahira, and it begins with a very specific halacha, a halacha that's discussed in Masechtas Uktzin. And that is that we know that food can become tameh. Food can also transmit tumah. In order for food to become tameh or transmit tumah, it has to have a shear. The shear is a beya, even though ordinarily shiurei oichlin is bikizayas, but when it comes to tumas oichlin is bikabeya. The question is, what happens with regards to appendages of food? So for example, you have a fruit. A fruit has a stem. The stem of the fruit, how do you look at that as it relates to the fruit with regards to a tumah v'tahira perspective? Is it mitzaref to the shear? Is it not mitzaref to the shear? If the stem of a fruit touches a davar tameh, does that make the fruit tameh? If the fruit is tameh and something tahor touches the stem of the fruit, does that thing now become tameh? What about the peel of a fruit or the hide of an animal? Is that mitzaref? Is it not mitzaref? Does that have the ability to be moitzi tumah? Does that have the ability to be machnes tumah? What about here? Fuzz that fruit sometimes has. How do you look at that? And as we saw yesterday, there are really 3 categories when you talk about appendages of food. The first is called a yad, the second is called a shomer, and the third one is neither a yad or a shomer. A yad is an appendage to food whose purpose is to help you grasp the food. The perfect example of that is the stem of a fruit. Another example would be the bone of meat. So a bone that has marrow inside it is treated a little bit differently. But a bone, for example, that has no marrow inside, so what's the purpose of the bone? You use the T-bone to be able to carry the piece of meat. So that would be considered a yad. The halacha of a yad is that it's not mitzaref to the shear, but at the same time it's moitzi u'machnas tumah, which means that if something tahor touches the yad of a davar tameh, through the yad, the tumah will go out. It will be niflat. The davar tameh will be moitzi tumah through its yad. The same as in the reverse. If the yad of this davar would touch a davar tameh, it would have the ability to suck in the tumah. It would have the ability to be machnas tumah. A shomer, that's the second category, that's something that isn't just an appendage in the sense that it's used to grasp the food, but it actually protects the food. Because it protects the food, so halacha treats it a little bit more like the fruit, and therefore not only does it have an ability to be moitzi u'machnes tumah into the food, but it also is mitzaref to the shear of the food itself. Something that's not a yad, and something that's not a shomer, that is certainly not mitzaref to the shear with regards to tumas oichlin. It also doesn't have the ability to be moitzi and machnes. Again, that's a little bit of what we saw yesterday, and the Gemara is going to go into this in a lot more detail. One other thing that we need as far as an introduction goes, and that is the Mishnah immediately compared and contrasted tumas oichlin and tumas nevela. So tumas oichlin is when you have a piece of food that it comes in contact with tumah, the halach is it becomes tameh and has an ability to transmit tumah. Rishon l'tumah, sheni l'tumah, shlishi l'tumah, revi'i l'tumah. Is it Chulin? Is it Truma? Is it Kachim? Chulin anasu b'tayris Truma. Chulin shanasu b'tayris Kachim. These are all familiar, all halachas that we're somewhat familiar with. But there's another type of tumah that relates to food. That's a very different type of tumah, and that's tumas nevela. So a nevela is aser b'achila. A nevela is also tameh. That's the primary difference between a nevela and a treifa. A nevela and a treifa are both aser b'achila, but a nevela, being that it didn't have a kosher shchita, also is tameh. Tumas nevela is different than tumas oichlin. The main difference is that tumas oichlin's shear is bikebeya. Tumas nevela's shear is bikizayas. Another difference as it relates to our sugyas is that as we mentioned briefly, and we'll see it in much better detail in today's daf, that the shomer of oichlin is mitzaref to the shear beya of tumas oichlin. The shomer of nevela is not mitzaref to the shear kizayas as it relates to tumas nevela. So again, we're dealing with the halachas of tumas oichlin and tumas nevela. We're dealing with the halachas of a yad and a shomer. These are appendages of oichlin. How they relate to the oichel itself and to the nevela itself from the perspective of Tumah V'Tayra. You have to look at it from the perspective, is it mitzaref to the shir? Does it have an ability to be moitzi? Does it have an ability to be machnes Tumah? A lot of drushes. We're going to see in today's daf, the Gemara is going to mention many psukim. Additionally, we're going to have kal v'chomers. We're going to have da'i lovim nadin lias kanadan. We're going to have an eno inyan, tneya inyans. It's just kedai. It's not an easy daf. These dafim that are coming now require real amelas. So just one hergish, and that is Yedu. The Bnei Yisachar says that there are yud gimel midas sha'atayr nedrashas b'hem. There are also yud gimel midas shal rachamim. The Bnei Yisachar says that the yud gimel midas sha'atayr nedrashas b'hem correspond to the Yud Gimel Midas Orachilim. He goes so far as to say that if you count the Yud Gimel Midas Atar Nedrashas from 1 through 13, they correspond to a specific Midas Orachamim 1 through 13 of Yud Gimel Midas Orachamim. Says the Heilige Bnei Yisachar that the second of the Yud Gimel Midas Torah Nedrashas Bem is Kal V'Chomer. The second of the Yud Gimel Midas Orachamim is Kael. Hashem Kael Racham V'Chanim. He says the Svar Makdoshim say that when Miriam was a Mitzayra, when Miriam was a Chayla, the pasuk says Vayitzak Moshe El Hashem Leimor Kael Na Rifan Allah. That Moshe Rabbeinu invoked the shame, the midah of Kael, because Kael is the midah of refuah. Kael is the midah with which HaKadosh Baruch Hu bestows refuah. From this morning's daf and the limud, the very difficult limud, the amelus patayra of Kal V'Chomer and Da'i Lovim this cannot be a schus refuah shalema for Shlomo ben Sarah Alizan. On that note, Zok the Mishnah. Tan Hasa. We learned in a Mishnah. Where's this Mishnah? So if it's not familiar, it's because it's the first Mishnah in Mesechtes Uktzin. So we're familiar with a lot of the first Mishnahs of many Mesechtes. Shnai Moshe Batalas. I may be getting them Dina Sayab. Tanan Hasa. Kol Shu Yad V'Loi Shomer. Anything that is a Yad. So it's an appendage to food. It's a Yad, but it's not a Shomer. Tameh, Umetame, Ve'enoi Mitzdaref. It could become Tameh. It's machnes tumah, meaning if the yad of food that's tahar touches a dover tameh, it will now become tameh. Additionally, if the yad of food that's tameh touches a dover tameh, it's mitame. Tameh means it's machnes tumah. That's a term that the Gemara is going to use a lot. Mitame means it's moitzi tumah, like boileya umafle. So tameh means it's machnes, mitame means it's moitzi. Ve'ina mitzdaref, but it's not mitzdaref to the shir kabeh. Shomer, if something's an appendage to a food, but it's also a shomer to the food, it protects the food. Afal pisha in a yad, even if it's not a yad, the halach is tameh, it's machnes toma, umetame, it's moitzi toma, umitzdaref, a shomer is more than a yad, it's even mitzdaref. Lo yad v'lo shomer. What if something's not a yad or a shomer? Lo tameh v'lo metame, it's not tameh, it's not metami, and certainly it's not going to be metami. It says the Gemara, Yadois heichid psivi. So what's the makar to Yadis? So when you learn Masechtas Nedarim, you discuss what's the makar to Yadis. This is the other Yadis. So either way, it's a pasuk, and this is a pasuk in the end of Parshas Shmini. The pasuk says, "V'chiyutan mayim al zera, v'nafal min nevlasam olav, tamehu lochet." So the pasuk over there is discussing tumas oichlin, and the pasuk says that in order for food to become tameh, it first has to check off the Mesechtes Machshirim box. So you have to make sure that it's Huchshel L'Kabel Tumah. How does food become Huchshel L'Kabel Tumah? It becomes wet. The owner of the food either is the one who made it wet, or at the very least, he saw it become wet and he was happy. There was nichusa with the fact that it was wet. The point is, it first has to become wet. So it says the pasuk, Chiyutan mayim al zera. If mayim is going to be on zera, on food, v'nafam min nevlasam olav, and then afterwards the nevela of one of the shmoyne shratzim that are tameh will land on this food, tameh lochem, they will be tameh. But the pasuk says tamehu lochem. What does lochem mean? L'chol shebetzarchechem. The rabbi says hayadis. That you see from here that the tumah doesn't necessarily have to fall on the food itself, but lochem meaning l'chol shebetzarchechem. Any part of the food that you use would be included in the definition of food, being that a yad of food is something that's part of the food in the practical usage sense. You carry the food sometimes by its yad, so it's for that reason it's included in this pasuk, and that's how you know that the yad of food is included in the definition of food as it relates to tumah. Thus, the rabbi says hayadis. There's another pasuk, and that pasuk is actually the very next pasuk, and it's also in the end of Parsha Shmini, and the pasuk there is discussing Tumas Nevela, and there too the Torah uses the word lochem in the context of Tumas Nevela, and we learn from there l'chol shebetzarchechem l'rabbi sesayod. It's have two psukim, two words of lochem, and two different psukim that deal with Tumah that say the word lochem, which we're saying means l'rabbi sesayodis. So if I have two psukim to be marba yodis, what do I do with those two psukim? Yad lahachnes u'lahoitzi. So I could be marba. One to tell me that the yad has an ability to be machnas tumah. So if you have a food which is tahar and tumah comes in contact with the yad will allow the food that it's attached to become tameh. Yad has an ability to be machnas. It also has an ability to be mitzi. If you have the yad of food that's already tameh and now it touches something else, through the yad it will transmit Tumah. So yad lahachnes, yad lahoitzi. Again, how do I have two drushes of yad? Because I have two words of lochem from two different sukkim. Okay. Shomer lahachnes lahoitzi leitzarach. As it relates to shomer that has an ability to be machnes lahoitzi, for that I don't need a pasuk. Kal v'chaymer miyad asi. That I can learn kal v'chaymer miyad. How so? Ma yad she'ena megina machnes. Matach yad which doesn't have an ability to be megan could be machnes u'moitzi or shomer like kolshke. I mean, the Gemara thinks in Svara for sure shomer is more than a yad. So a yad which doesn't protect has an ability to be moitzi or machnes. Certainly, a shomer which does protect should have the ability to be mitzi machnes. If that's the case, the Gemara continues. We'll explain all this. Shomer because of Rachman Alamali. So why then did the Torah even mention a pasuk about shomer? Now, where did the Torah mention a pasuk about shomer? That was yesterday's daf. That was on the bottom of daf Kuf Yud Zayin Amud Beis, where the Gemara brought a drasha from the Devei Rabbi Yishmael. It says, with regards to food, that the nevela of one of the Shemona Shratzim fell on it, but it wasn't wet yet. So the Torah over there said it's going to be tar. The pasuk was v'chiyipal min nevlasam al kol zera zerua asher yizareya tahar. Why is it tahar? What do you mean? The nevela of one of the Shemona Shratzim fell on it. The Torah says because it wasn't wet. Afterwards, the Torah says, "V'chiyutan ma'im al zera." Then tamehu lochet. But if it wasn't wet, then it's going to be tar. And the Torah was very wordy. It says, "Al kol zera zerua asher yizareya." And we learned from the words asher yizareya that the way we look at food from a Tumas Oichlin perspective is how would you plant this food? Not how would you eat the food, how would you plant this food? And if you were going to take a stalk of wheat and you were going to plant it, you would plant it in its husk. You would plant it with its shomer around it. So you see that the shomer is considered part of the food. So the Gemara is now bothered with a question. If I have a pasuk that tells me that the yad of food is included in the definition of food, both lahachnes ulahoitzi, then why do I need that drasha, that brisa that the Gemara brought on the bottom of Daf Kuf Yud Zayin Amud Beis? Why do I need Asher Yizareya to tell me that a shomer is considered food? If a yad is considered food, certainly a shomer is considered food. Didn't we just say that I know shomer from yad mikal v'chomer? It's a shomer because of Rachman Olam, says the Gemara Shma Mino L'tzar. If you know what that must be coming to teach me, it's coming to teach me that a shomer has even more halachos than do yadis. A yad is considered food as it relates to being moitzi umachnes, but a shomer is considered food even for more than that. It's even considered food to be mitzdaref. So pause, not period, and certainly not exhale, but just pause for one moment. So we started with a Mishnah, right? Today's daf started with a Mishnah. The Mishnah is the first Mishnah Masechtas Uktzin. The Mishnah said as follows: that anything that's an appendage to food, if it's a yad, the halach is it's moitzi toma, it's machnes toma. It's considered part and parcel of the food as it relates to it bringing toma into the food and taking tuma out of the food. However, it's not mitzdaref. It's not mitzdaref to the shir tumas oichlin. So if you don't have a kebeya without the stem or without the bone, it wouldn't be mitzdaref to the shir kebeya. Shomer is moitzi umachnes. It's also mitzdaref. And the question is, Benani Mili, how do you know all this? So the Gemara, I'll tell you how you know all this. It's based really on three psukim. I have two psukim that tell me that a yad is considered part of food as it relates to tumah v'tahira. V'chiyuter ma'im al zerav and often the floss and all of tomei hu lochem l'chol shebetzarchechem. I have another pasuk v'chiyomas ben abehema shehi lochem l'chol shebetzarchechem. Two psukim to be mar b'yadas l'tumah. What do I need two for? One to tell me that it could be moitzi, one to tell me that it could be machnes. Okay, so that's how I know yadas are moitzi machnes. If I know yadas are moitzi machnes, then kal v'chomer, I know that shomer is also moitzi machnes, because shomer is more a part of food than yad is. The fact that the shomer protects, that makes it more a part of the food. Thus, once I know yad, I know shomer as well. Stating that, I have a third pasuk. The pasuk that the Gemara brought yesterday's stuff. Al kol zera Zorua Asher Yizareya. And from that pasuk you learn that a shomer is considered part of food. What's that coming to tell me? It's not coming to tell me that it's Moitzi Machnis. I know that Kal V'Chomer from Yad. So what then is it coming to tell me? It's coming to tell me that it's mitzdaref to the shir. So I therefore then have a pasuk, 2 psukim, to tell me that a Yad is food. Once I know Yad, with regards to the Moitzi Machnis, I know Shomer Moitzi Machnis. I also have a pasuk to tell me that Shomer is mitzdaref. I don't have a pasuk that tells me Yad is mitzdaref. I can't learn Yad from Shomer because Shomer is more than Yad. I can learn Shomer from Yad, but I can't learn Yad from Shomer. So this is cheshbon, but it's pretty straightforward at this point. And therefore, says the Gemara, B'chura, I have a makar to everything. I know that Yad is Moitzi Machnis. If that's the case, I know that Shomer is Moitzi Machnis. I have an extra pasuk of Shomer is probably coming to tell me that it's mitzdaref. I don't have a pasuk telling me that Yad is mitzdaref. Thus, Yad could be Moitzi Machnis, Shomer could be Moitzi Machnis, and be mitzdaref. That is the makar, the biblical source to the first Mishnah in Masechtas Uktzah. But the Gemara has a problem, and the Gemara is going to discuss its problem with this really all the way till the bottom of the Yom. A lot of cheshbon now. Freit the Gemara, Yad lahachnis, v'loy lahoitzi, shomer lahachnis, ulahoitzi. Maybe Yad only has an ability to be machnis. Maybe it does not have an ability to be moitzi. Now, didn't we just say you have 2 psukim? And if you have 2 psukim that are mar biyad, one is telling me that it's machnas, one is telling me that it's moitzi. How could the Gemara now suggest ve'im yad lahachnas v'loy loitzi? So Rashi asks the kasha, and Rashi says that it's true we had 2 psukim, but one of the 2 psukim were regarding tumas oichlin, v'chiyutan mayim al zera v'nofim min uflos and olav tami hu lochem. The second pasuk was v'chiyomus min abehema shi lochem, which is discussing tumas nevela. We already saw in the Mishnah very briefly that tumas nevela and tumas oichlin are not one and the same. They're different. And being that tumas nevela and tumas oichlin are not one and the same, maybe I don't have an extra pasuk. Maybe I have one by tumas oichlin, I have one by tumas nevela. So if I only have one by tumas oichlin, so which is what the first Mishnah Masechtas Uktzin is discussing. It's not discussing tumas nevela; it's discussing tumas oichlin. So freit the Gemara, maybe the one that I have is teaching me mach. It's not teaching me moitzi. If that's the case, I know that a shomer is also machnis and moitzi. I know Shomer is machnis because of Yad is machnis. Shomer is machnis mikal v'chomer. I'll also know that Shomer is moitzi because I have an extra pasuk by Shomer. The pasuk said, "I'll call Zera Zerua Asher Yizareya." But if that's the case, I don't have a makar to the Mishnah because which halachas that the Mishnah mentioned do I not know? Ava Yad lahoitzi. I don't have a makar to tell me that Yad could be moitzi because I now only have one makar for Yad and I use it to be machnis. V'Shomer l'tzaref. I also don't have an extra pasuk of Shomer to tell me that the Shomer could be mitzaref to the shir because the extra pasuk of Shomer I just used to tell me that Shomer could be moitzi. Says the Gemara, Yad lahachnis v'loy lahoitzi loy matzah. So the Gemara says it's a nice attempt, but really it doesn't work because it's not possible to say that a Yad would be able to be machnis but not be able to be moitzi. Why? It's just in svara it doesn't work. Hashta iyuli ma'ayla afuki mibaya. It's pasha to kal v'chomer. If I know that a Yad could be machnis, it certainly should be able to be moitzi. The Gemara is assuming in svara that it's easier to be moitzi than it is to be machnis. It's a bigger chiddush that something can bring tumah in than to say that something can bring tumah out. And as a result, says the Gemara, if I had one yad and it's teaching me machnis, then I would know moitzi. So if I would know moitzi, I would know yad lahachnis ulahoitzi, I would know shomer lahachnis ulahoitzi, which means that the extra pasuk of shomer I would use to tell me that it's mitzdaref. But the Gemara asks the obvious comeback, and that is, okay, so it's true. If I have one yad and I used it to teach me that yad could be machnes, I know for sure that it could be moitzi. But how do you know the one yad is coming to teach me that it's machnes? Maybe the one yad is teaching me that it's moitzi, it's not machnes. And if that's the case, I know shomer lahoitzi. Ulahachnes, I also know shomer lahachnes because the kroy yisera of shomer I'm going to use now to teach me that it's machnes. Avayad lahachnes, v'shomer litzaref loy. But I don't have a makar then to tell me yad lahachnes because I only have one makar for yad, and I don't have a makar to tell me that shofar could be mitzdaref. Because how did I know shomer could be mitzdaref from the extra pasuk? I need the extra pasuk to tell me that it could be machnes. So the Gemara says, I hear, but at the same time, even if you want to tell me that the 2 psukim that we thought we had for yad are really only one, because being that one is discussing tumas oichlin and the other one is discussing tumas nevela, I can't learn oichlin from nevela from tuma as per the first mishnah in the parak, but I still have an extra mention of yad. I still have a second pasuk, yad yisei riksiv, and that's also a pasuk at the end of Parashat Shmini. It's also discussing tuma Tumah, it says, the Chol Asher Yipam in Nevlasan Olav Yitma, Tana V'Kirayim Yutatz Tmeim. Hey, utmeim yulachem. It's discussing a davar tamei, such as one of the shmeina shratzim that falls into a tanner or kirayim, into an oven. Tanner kirayim were two different types of ovens that were coming back in the day. And the pasuk says that if one of the shmeina shratzim falls into a tanner or kirayim, there's a special type of tumah, kol asher b'soicha yitma. Even if it only falls into the aver of the tanner, that's enough for it to transmit tumah. But the point is, the pasuk uses the magic word there again. It says, "Tmeim yu lochem." What does lochem mean? Lochem. So again, I have an extra pasuk of yados. If I have an extra pasuk of yados, one teaches me lahachas, one teaches me lahoitzi. Once I know yad lahachas lahoitzi, kavachayim I know shomer lahachas lahoitzi. If that's the case, what do I do with the extra pasuk of shomer? Matzmi is coming to tell me that it could be mitzaref. So again, l'churim, all the Gemara is saying is that we said we have a makar to the first Mishnah Masechtus Uktzin. How so? What the Mishnah Masechtas Uktzin say? Yeah, it could be Moitzi Umachnas. A Shomer could be Moitzi Umachnas and it could be Mitzdaref. What's the Makar? So we said it's made up of 3 psukim. 3 psukim teach me this whole mission. It's 5 halachas, but only 3 psukim are needed, based on Kal V'Chayvers. So what's the 3 psukim? It says Lochem once, with regards to Yados. Lochem twice with regards to Yados. One teaches me Moitzi, one teaches me Machnas. If I know Yad could be Moitzi Umachnas, Kal V'Chayvers, Shomer could be Moitzi Umachnas. If that's the case, why did Torah have to mention something about Shomer? Shomer is probably coming to teach me that it could also be mitzvah. The question was, where do you have 2 psukim of Yadas? So one is Tumas Oich and one is Tumas Nevela. That's not an extra pasuk. There's no way you can learn one from the other. Says the Gemara, I hear, but I have another extra pasuk. It says Lochem by Tanur Kurayim, also in the context of Tumah. Why did the Torah have to mention Lochem by Tumas Oichlin and then Lochem again by Tanur V'Kirayim, which is Tumah of the Tanner, or the Oichlin that are inside the Tanner, must be, one is extra again, so one lahachnes, one lahoitzi, kavachayim shomer, and the pasuk of shomer is going to be extra. But the Gemara says, I disagree. There's nothing extra over here. Meaning, if you do a little bit of a recap, what you have is 3 psukim that teach miyadas. 3 mentions of lachem. One regarding good old-fashioned tumas oichlin. One regarding Tumas Nevela, and then the third one with regards to Tumas Tana V'Kirayim. The Gemara is going to discuss now that none of these are extra because I can never learn one from the other. Each one has its own unique qualities that doesn't allow me to learn one from the other. Meaning, which one do you want to say is extra? Why are we saying one is extra? If one is extra, it means you have 2. So I have one lahachtas, one lahoitzi, which is the basis. That is the basis and the premise for everything that we're saying. But the Gemara says none of them extra. Why? Because you want the Torah to have mentioned Zra and V'leisa Hanich Minayu, meaning let it mention Yadois by Tumas Oichlin, and I'll learn Tana V'Kirayim and Tumas Nevela from those 2. You can't. Because Mala, Zra came to Masa Meruba. Zra is to Masa Meruba. How so? Says Rashi. It's Tumasa Meruba versus Tana V'Kirayim because Zra and food could become Tomei even from a Vlada Toma. Right? Food could be a Shlishi Latoma, Revi Latoma. Tana V'Kirayim can only become Tomei from an Ava Toma. That's number 1. It's Tumasa Meruba from Tumas Nevela. That was the first Mishnah. The Mishnah said Riba Latame Tumas Oichlem, Imasha Riba Latame Tumas Nevela. And the Mishnah gave 2 examples of it. So you certainly can't learn either Tumas Tana V'Kirayim or Tumas Nevela from Tumas Oichlem. Let the Torah say Tanner and learn the other ones from Tanner. Mala Tanner shkem etame maviroi. Tanner has a chumrah. It's metame maviroi. Kol asher b'soichai yitma. Even if it doesn't make contact, that's a very big kiddush. You don't find such a concept by Tumas Oichlin. You don't find it by Tumas Nevela. Maybe learn the other 2 from Nevela. Mala Nevela shkem etame adam. Nevela has a lot of chumras. Number 1, Nevela can be metame adam, whereas Oichel can never be metama adam. Tana V'Kirayim can be metama adam. Umetama b'masa. Also, there's tumas masa by nevela. V'tumah yoytza migufa. It's a source of tumah, as opposed to Oichel became tummy from something else. The Tana V'Kirayim became tummy from something else. So, as it relates to these 3, says, I think I need all 3. There's nothing extra. I don't have one to teach me lahachtas, one to teach me lahoitzi. I need them all to teach me that by their respective unique types of tumah, you have a halach of yadas. But one halach of yadas, not 2 halachas of yadas. But the Gemara says, 1 second. It's true you can't learn one from one. But maybe make a mahatzad. Hi Tesi. Let the Torah not mention Yadis by Zraim and learn Zraim from a tzad hashava between
Tana v'kirayim and nevela. What are you going to tell me? Tana v'kirayim has a chumrah. Kol asher b'soicha yitma. Nevela teichiach. Nevela has a chumrah. The three chumras. Tana v'kirayim l'chech. But the Gemara says you can't learn a matzah because malahanach shekem etam shlo behechsher. Toim abizram shekem etam and ela behechsher. The two together have a chumrah that they don't have to become huchshel l'kabel tuma, as opposed to food that does have to be huchshel l'kabel tuma. So I can never learn tumas oichlin from those two. But Amar Rav Yeshua said that's not a good pircha because perish loy huchsheru ketanu shaloi nigmar malachta. Why is it that food needs to become wet and in order for it to become huchshel l'kabel tuma? Because the peri, one of the basic rules of tuma is that something has to be complete in order for it to become tummy. When something's in an incomplete state, it can't become tummy. Fruit is considered to be incomplete until it's wet. When it gets wet, that's the gemar malacha. A tanner has the same halacha of gemar malacha. Now, by a tanner, being that it's a utensil, it's an oven, it's not a food, so the way it becomes completed is not by becoming wet, but by being makabapatish, finishing the actual work. But the concept of Masechtas Machshirin relates to a Tana v'Kirayim just as much as it relates to food. So you can't tell me that there's a chumrah in Tana v'Kirayim that it doesn't require anything to make it huchshel l'kabel tuma. That's a full statement. It does require. It's just not the same thing that oichel has. My oichel has to become wet. Here it doesn't have to become wet. Elo parachach. But the Gemara says, so if that's not a pirch, I'll tell you a different pirch. Malahanoch. Those two, Tana v'Kirayim and Avelish came in Tamish lo minigiyah. They could become Tamish lo benigiyah. How so? The Tana v'Kirayim becomes Tame even from its aver. Nevela doesn't have to touch anything. Nevela is the source of Tuma. Tame b'zrom shem netam elo begiyah as opposed to Rom it's only netam begiyah. So you can never learn out Zra'im one for one from either Tana v'Kirayim and Avela. You also can learn Zra'im from a Mahatzad between Tana v'Kirayim and Avela. So the Gemara says, I hear. But maybe you know where the extra one is? Why can I learn Tana from the Vela and from Zra'im? So the Gemara says, I'll tell you what. Because Malahanoch, Shekein, Oichel. They have a Chumrah that they're both Oichlim. What's the Chumrah? It's not clear. But it's a unique quality that they both have. Tumas oichlin is obviously an oichel, and avel is also an oichel, as opposed to an oven is not food. You bake food, you cook food, but it's not food, right? So maybe the one that's extra is nevela. Maybe let it not say nevela, and I'll learn nevela from Tana v'Kirayim and from oichlin. But the Gemara says yad nevela. If that's the case, why did Torah have to say yad by nevela? Oh, that's the extra one. And eno inyan liyad nevela, tneo inyan liyad alma. So if I don't need it for yad nevela, I'll use it for Yad Da'alma. Now, why don't I need it for Yad Nevela? Because I could have learned Nevela from the other two. So essentially, I have an extra Yad. If I have an extra Yad, the Gemara does a little Chazara for us now. Yad Lahachnis, Yad Lahoitzi. So I have two mentions of Yad. What are the two? The Torah mentions it by Tumas Oichlin. The Torah mentions it by Tumas Tana v'Kirayim, and then I have an extra one by Nevela. Why is Nevela extra? Because at this point in the Gemara, I could learn Yad and Nevela from a Tzad HaShava between Tana v'Kirayim and between Tumas Oichlin. If that's the case, I know Yad Lahoitziu Lahachnes. Kal v'Chomer, I know Shomer Lahoitziu Lahachnes. When the Torah mentions a ribuy of shomer regarding tumah. Yesterday's drasha al kol zera zeiru asher yizareya. That must be shomer litzaref, and if shomer is litzaref, so that's the makar gavaldiks. At this point, it sounds like we have the makar, but the Gemara immediately toich kedei dibur, without even letting us come up for breath. The Gemara rejects this because the Gemara says akati yad and avela itzrichna. You can't learn yad and avela from yad of Oichlin and Tana v'Kirayim to say that it's extra to trigger the whole drasha, because you need Yad and Avela. I would have thought a Geshmak Svara that you love him and Adin Lias Kinadon. Meaning it's true I could learn Yad and Avela from Tana v'Kirayim and from regular Tumas Oichlin from a Tzad HaShav. That's true. But at the same time, if I would learn Nevela from Oichlin and Tanner, says the Gemara, I would know that a Yad and Avela has an ability to be Moitzi Machnas Tuma. But I would only know it as much as Oichlin and Tanner v'Kirayim could be Moitzi Machnas Tuma. Now, Oichlin could be Moitzi Tuma, right? It's a source of Tuma, but it can't be Matam and Adam. Tanner v'Kirayim is a source of Tuma once it becomes Tama, but it doesn't have an ability to be Matam Adam. Nevela could be Matam Adam. How do I know that a Yad and Avela could be Moitzi Tuma even for Adam? I can't learn that Kal v'Chomer from Oichlin and Tana v'Kirayim with a Tzad HaShava. It's all Geshmak. This is classic Yud Gimel Midrash Ater and the Drashos Behem. But the problem is, there's a rule of Dayer Love Min Adin Lias Kinadon. And if Oichlin and Tana v'Kirayim don't have the ability to be metama adam. Certainly their yad doesn't have an ability to be metama adam, so I have no way to learn that nevela would be able to be metama adam. So I need yad and nevela to teach me that the yad and nevela has an ability even to be metama adam. So if that's the case, I need yad and nevela. Yad and nevela mitzrach tzarech. If that's the case, says the Gemara, so l'chayra, I don't have my drasha. That's not the Gemara, and I'll tell you. There was one other pasuk that we didn't mention yet this morning, that we had in yesterday's daf, and that is the Gemara in the bottom of daf Kuf Yud Zayin Amud Aleph onto the top of daf Yud Ches Amud Aleph. So Kuf Yud Zayin Amud Beis, to Kuf Yud Ches Amud Aleph, the Gemara brought a drasha. The drasha had a reisha and a sefer. The reisha of the drush of the brisa, the way the Gemara came out, the Maskana teaches me that shomer, the Tumas Oichlin, is mitzdarif to the shir, as per everything we're talking about this morning. The first Mishnah Masech is Uktzin, but a shomer of a nevela is not mitzdarif to the shir kizayas of Tumas Nevela. Stating that, there was a sefer, and the sefer said that even though the shomer is not mitzdarif to the shir, but the shomer does have an ability to be moitzi tumah. Incidentally, when you talk about nevela, there's no machnas. Right, nevela doesn't become tamei. You're only dealing with moitzi. Oichlin, you're dealing with is it moitzi, is a machnas. A tamei oichel is moitzi. A tahar oichel would be machnas. But when you're dealing with nevela, all you're dealing with is moitzi. And the Gemara brought a drasha for that too. So there was a pasuk that teaches me that a shomer the nevela is not mitzdarif, and there was a pasuk that teaches me that a shomer the nevela is moitzi toma. Freak the Gemara, what do I need that for? The shomer the nevela with the loy tzarech. Why did the Torah mention shomer the nevela? Why doesn't it have to say Shomer Din Avela? Because once I know Yad Din Avela, and I know Yad Din Avela is Mefurish a pasuk by Yad Din Avela. It's a pasuk. You don't even have to learn it from anything. It's a pasuk. Once I know Yad could be Moitzi, I know Shomer could be Moitzi. Because Madoch Yad, Kal V'chayim Shomer. So if I know Shomer could be Moitzi, why did the Torah have to mention Shomer Din Avela? So this is where we found something extra. So as the Gemara Shomer Din Avela, if the Torah told it to me to tell me that the Shomer Din Avela is mitzdarif to the shir kazayis, I'm loy mitzdarif. You said it's not mitzdarif. That was the ratio of that brisa. Ulohoitzi, to tell me that a Shomer could be Moitzi Toma Kal V'chayim Miyad. That I know Kal V'chayim Miyad. Elam Ein Inyan l'shomer din avela. If I don't need it to teach me shomer din avela today, inyan l'yad din avela. Let me use it for yad din avela, but I don't need it for yad din avela either because I have a pasuk for yad din avela. V'meinu inyan l'yad din avela today inyan l'yad alma. Use it for yad alma. Yad alma. I know yad alma. I have a pasuk for that. I have one pasuk by Tumas Oichlin, one by Tana V'Kirayim. I have one by nevela. So what I need it for is to teach me a second halach of yad. Why a second halach of yad? Because if I only had one, I would think yad could be moitzi. I wouldn't know the yad could be machnas. Now that I have an extra, I have yad lehoitzi, yad lehachnes. So if I know yad lehoitzi lehachnes, I know shomer lehoitzi lehachnes. Why do I need the pasuk of shomer by Tumas Oichlin? Al kol zera zeirua asher yizareya. The shomer litzaref. It must be. It's coming to you mitzaref, and that's how I know everything. But the Gemara says, one second, the emo. I don't think this is good because. Why don't we say im eno yinyan l'shomer din avela tneyo inyan l'shomer d'alma? You have an extra pasuk of shomer din avela, which I don't need. To tell me that the shomer of an avela has an ability to be moitzi toma, I know that kal v'chayim from the fact that the yad of an avela has an ability to be moitzi. So the Gemara says, what do I do with it? If I have an extra pasuk that teaches me that a shomer din avela could be moitzi, tneyu inyan liyad do'ichlin. So if I know now that Yad of Oichlin could be Moitzi Umachnes, because I already had one Makar to it, now I have a second Makar, then the Makar of Shomer the Oichlin is coming to teach me that it has an ability to be mitzdarif. But there was one leap the Gemara said that I'm not so comfortable with. Had we go from an extra pasuk by Shomer din Avela to use it for Yad Oichlin. Wouldn't it make more sense? So if it's extra by nevela, I don't need it by nevela. So you're right. I have to place it somewhere. It's a displaced drasha. Right? I don't know what to do with it. It's a refugee drasha. I have to do something with it. So I don't know what to do with it. So it's a shomer din nevela. That's where the drasha is. No, why do I have a right to jump from shomer to yad? L'chayra, what I should do with it is and say is meino inyan l'shomer din nevela, tneyo inyan l'shomer d'alma. If that's the case, so I have a makar to teach me that shomer lahachnes. And to teach me that yad could be moitzi, but the shomer litzarif, and I could even learn shomer litzarif. How could I learn shomer litzarif? because the pasuk of Al Kol Zera Zerua Asher Yizareya will still be extra with regards to Shomer. I'll know that a Yad could be Moitzi. That I know from the one limit of Yad. If I know that a Yad could be Moitzi, Kal V'chomer Shomer could be Moitzi. I have the extra pasuk of Shomer den Avela, which I'm in the Shomer den Avela, because a nevela could only be moitzi, and I know the yad could be moitzi, so certainly the shomer could be moitzi. So this is an extra drasha. I'll apply it now to shomer the oichlin to tell me that it could also be machnas. It's not a gay of machnas by nevela. So if I'm using it for machnas, I can't use it for nevela. I have to move it somewhere else. So I'm going to use it now to tell me that oichel could be machnas. So I know that oichel shomer could be machnas. If that's the case, I know shomer could be moitzi machnas, which means I still have that pasuk extra. I'll call zera zeru asher yizareya to tell me that shomer could be mitzvah. So I have almost everything in the Mishnah of Uktzin. I have 4 out of the 5 halachas, but I don't have all 5. What don't I have? How do I know that yad could be machnis? Gishmak. El yad lahachnis loy. So the Gemara says this didn't work. So l'chayr at the end of the day, when we started off, we thought we had a nice drush. It was very neat. 3 psukim. I know all the halachas in the Mishnah Masechtas Uktzin. After going through kal v'chaymes and mahadsads and etc. Meinu inyan tnei inyan, we're really back to where we started. We're back to what is the makar to the Mishnah. Again, what's the Mishnah? The very first Mishnah Masechtas Uktzin, which says that the yad of oichel could be moitzi tuma and it could be machnas tuma, but it's not mitzarif to the share. The shomer of an oichel could be moitzi tuma, it could be machnas tuma, it could be mitzarif to the share. What is the makar to the halacha? Says the Gemara. You know what the makar is? Here we go. Elamei kara ki ksiva yad achnasa ksiva. The Gemara actually gives a very straightforward answer. It's not even a full line, and it's very simple as well. We said that the Torah mentioned yad by tuma. There was one mention of yad. One with regards to classic tumas oichlin, one with regards to the tumah v'tana kirayim, one with regards to nevela. The Gemara, however, assumed that if I only have one mention of the word yad, I would use it for the least chiddush. Tafasta mu'at tafasta, tafasta meruba loy tafasta. So you use it for the least chiddush. What's the least chiddush? That it could be mitzi. It's easier. It's more kal for it to be mitzi than for it to be machnis. So you use it for the smallest chiddush. What's the smallest chiddush? It could be mitzi. So I know that a yad could be mitzi, but I don't know that a yad could be machnis. And being that I don't know that a yad could be machnis, it causes problems. I say, what do you mean? I have 3 psukim that tell me that a yad could do something. I need 3 to tell me it could be mitzi. Chad lo haitzi v'chad an. The Gemara says no. It's 3 distinct types of tumas that the Torah mentioned it by, and they're all not the same, and you can't even make mahatzad. So at the end of the day, the Gemara said, no, the one drasha that I have by Oichlin, the one that I have by Tana v'Kiran, it's coming to teach me mitzi. It's not coming to teach me machnes. So the Gemara, you can't say that. You know why? Because read the pasuk. What does the pasuk say? V'chiyutan mayim al zera v'nafal min nivlasam olav tamihu lachem. Lachem is talking about the yad. What happened? You have food that's tahar, and an avela fell on it. As long as it was chiyutan mayim al zera, you checked off the Masechtas Machshirim box. The halacha now is going to be tamihu lachem. Are we talking about food being mitzi or machnes? We're talking about food being machnes. It's mefurish in the Torah that we're talking about food that's being machnes. Zok the Gemara Geshmak Elamei Kara Kiksiva Yad Ahachnasak. Read the pasuk. It's not pshat that I have one drasha. I don't know what to do with this abstract, esoteric drasha. Let's use it lahaitzi. No. It's very clear what the Torah is telling me. The Torah is telling me a yad has an ability to be machnes tuma. If I know a yad could be machnes tuma, kal v'chaymer a yad could be mitzi tuma, because that the Gemara is stalled in the beginning of the sugya. That machnis is kal v'chaymer milahaitzi. So if I know yad could be mitzi, I know yad could be machnis. If I know yad could be mitzi or machnis, I know shomer could be mitzi or machnis. It's a double kal v'chaymer. I know yad could be mitzi, kal v'chaymer yad could be machnis. If yad could be mitzi or machnis, kal v'chaymer shomer should be able to be mitzi or machnis. If that's the case, what do I need the pasuk kichol zera zeru asher yizarei l'rabbi tzashomer? Must be. It's coming to tell me that it's mitzdarif. That is therefore the makar to the first Mishnah Masechtas Uktzin, according to the first teretz of the Gemara. The second teretz of the Gemara, Zok the Gemara. 1 second, we're not done yet, but we're not up to the second teretz yet. Ela mikara ksiva yad achnasa ksiva ela shomer din avela lamali. But the Gemara asks another kasha. Okay, let's go back now. We had the pasuk of shomer din avela. What do I need shomer din avela for? We're just trying to reconcile everything now. L'chayra, I know everything by nevela as well. Because if I know that yad is moitzi by oichlin, I know Yad is Moitzi by Nevela. It's a Mefurish Pasuk. There is no Machnes by Nevela. So I know Yad is Moitzi. Kavachomer, Shomer is Moitzi. I know Shomer is not Mitzdarif anyways. I have a Pasuk for that. So when the Torah, the Seif of the Bryce at the end of yesterday's Daf, on the top of Daf Kuf Yud Chesam and Aleph, what do we need that for? So the Gemara, and the Gemara speaks to that. If Shomer the Nevela is coming to tell me that the Shomer is Mitzdarif to the Shir, Amr Loi Mitzdarif. Ila Hachnos Ula Hoitzi, Kavachomer, yeah, the Hachnos is a misnomer, right? Because Nevela is never Machnes. It's always being Moitzi. Ila Hachnos Ula Hoitzi, Kavachomer Miyadas. Yeah, says the Gemara, you're right, but Milsa da Asya B'Kal V'Chomer Tarek V'Kasav Lakra. Even though you don't need it, and it's a Milsa da Asya B'Kal V'Chomer. But there's a concept, there's an Andam in Shas that holds Milsa da Asya B'Kal V'Chomer Tarek V'Kasav Lakra. Freak the Gemara, what's the next question? Ihachi. If you're going to tell me Milsa da Asya B'Kal V'Chomer Tarek V'Kasav Lakra, Shomer Da'alma, as it relates to a Shomer Da'alma, what does Da'alma mean? Not of a Nevela, of a regular Eichlin, Ein Melacha, Lahachnis, Milsa da Asya B'Kal V'Chomer Tarek V'Kasav Lakra. What was the Makar that Shomer Da'alma is Mitzdarif? Because the Torah wrote, I'll call Zerah Zeruah Yizareh. Why did the Torah have to write that? I mean, what's it coming to teach me? I know everything. How do I know it? Mikal v'chaymer. Oh, so maybe the Torah is just telling me something I already know. Mikal v'chaymer. What makes it extra? The premise was it's extra. And being that it's extra, it must be it's coming to teach me a new halacha. What's the new halacha? That it's mitzvah. Maybe there's nothing extra over here. Maybe it's just a milsa da'asi b'kal v'chaymer tarach v'kasav lakra. So the Gemara gives a simple answer. You don't just say milsa da'asi b'kal v'chaymer. That's like a last resort answer. So it works. And if you have a drasha with nothing to do with it, so then you could say milsa da'asi b'kal v'chaymer tarach v'kasav lakra. But to the extent it's something that you couldn't darshan, heicha de ikal midrash, if you could darshan something darshinon. So as it relates to oichlin, where it's possible that the shoym is mitzdarif to the shir, we'll use the extra pasuk to tell me it's mitzdarif to the shir. But by nevela, you can't use it to tell me that the shoym is mitzdarif to the shir, because we have a mefurish pasuk that tells me that it's not mitzdarif to the shir. The ratio of that price is said benevlasa v'lor ba'arsha in all of kazayis basar, clearly telling me that it's not mitzdarif. So if it's not mitzdarif, what's the pasuk for? I have nothing to do with it. Okay, no, there's nothing wrong with that. You could always say milsa da'asi v'kal v'chaymer, but to the extent that there's something to darshan from it, then certainly we're going to darshan. Either way, that is the first mahalach of the Gemara. The second mahalach of the Gemara is a very short mahalach. Rav Chaviva said different teretz. He went back to one of the cheshbonos that the Gemara made earlier, and that was that there was the shomer din avela was extra, right? Essentially, according to the first mahalach in the Gemara, there's one thing that's extra. We were able to make sense of all the different drushes and all the different psukim tucked away in the end of Parashat Shmini. We were able to make sense of all the lachems. Everything seems to work out. The only thing that was extra is why the Torah had to mention that the shomer of an avela is mighty tova, and the Gemara had no choice but to say milsa da'asi b'kal v'chaymer tarach v'kasav lacha. Rav Chaviva felt that Darton is the schlissel to the whole sugya. He thought that it's that extra pasuk that we learn everything from. Meaning, shomer din avela is extra. So what do you do with shomer din avela? You know what you do with shomer din avela? I use it to tell me that a yad could be machnas. Whoa. How do I go from shomer din avela being moitzi to yad being machzit? Because im eno yinyin le shomer din avela, tneyo yinyin le yad the oichlin. Right, which is hard. The Yad Eichlin to tell me that it could be machs. What was the Gemara's problem with that? When the Gemara attempted to say that, the Gemara felt that like mehechatesi, you have a right to make such a jump. The top line of Kuf Yud Chesam and Aleph. Ve'emam eno inyan l'shomer d'neveya t'nei inyan l'shomer d'alma. Right. If anything, say eno inyan l'shomer d'neveya t'nei l'shomer d'alma. How do you have a right to go eno inyan l'shomer d'neveya t'nei inyan l'yad? Said Rav Chaviva, very simple, because the shomer d'neveya, is it really a shomer, or is it more treated like a yad in halacha? It's more treated like a yad. Because in oichlin, shomer is mitzdaref to the shir, yad's not mitzdaref to the shir. A shomer din avela is also not mitzdaref to the shir. So we look at the shomer din avela as if it's a yad, shani oimer, shani shomer din avela, keeping the maisa yad ka'avid, a yad shadinale, and that's where you have the extra pasuk. So again, the makar to Masechtas, the first Mishnah of Mesechtes Uktzin is either made up of two psukim. It says by Oichlin Lachem, which
talking specifically about food being machnes toma. That was the first teretz of the Gemara. The Pshutei Shel Mikra is talking about food being machnes toma. Once I know that a yad, lochem, could be machnes, kal v'chomer, yad could be moitzi. If a yad could be moitzi or machnes, kal v'chomer, a shomer could be moitzi or machnes. If that's the case, the pasuk, I'll call zera zeru asher yizareya, which is talking about shomer the oichlin, is extra. I don't need it to tell me that it's moitzi or machnes. I know that kal v'chomer from yad must be he's coming to tell me that it's mitzdaref to the shir. By nevela, I have a drasha that tells me specifically that shomer is not mitzdaref to the shir. But either way, that's the makar to the first mishnah, Masechta Suktzin. It's really made up of two psukim. It's made up of two psukim that are in succession of each other, incidentally. The pasuk that says that food that wasn't wet that becomes that a nevela falls on is tahar, and the pasuk that says that food that was wet and a nevela fell on it becomes tameh. It's those two psukim that teach me all 5 halachas mentioned in the Mishnah Masechtas Uktzin. The second makar is that it says yad in the parish of Tumas Eichlin. We don't look at the Pshutei Shel Mikra and say that the Pshutei Shel Mikra is talking about yad being machnes. No, maybe the pasuk means yad being moitzi. Either Pshutei Shel Mikra, like the Gemara thought on the whole Kuf Yud Ches Amud Aleph. We're not going there. But we're not looking at that. We're saying there's one limud that's marba yad. It makes sense to say that it's marba that yad could be moitzi. So I know yad could be moitzi from there. There's a pasuk that says that a shomer din avela could be moitzi, which I don't need. Because if yad din avela could be moitzi, I have a pasuk for that also. I know that shomer din avela could certainly be moitzi. The pasuk of shomer din avela is extra. It may not inin l'shomer din avela today or inin l'yad oichlin. How do you go from shomer din avela to yad oichlin? Because the shomer din avela is like a yad in the sense that it can't be mitzdaref. Yad is unique in that it can't be mitzdaref. A shomer din avela could also not be mitzdaref. It's a chiddush in avela that shomer is not mitzdaref. Thus, I now have two psukim by yad din avela. I have two psukim. What are the two? One is the pasuk of yad din avela that it says 3 times in 3 different contexts. That teaches me lahoitzi. I have the shomer din avela, which am eno yin tnei uinyan. So now I know yad could be moitzi umachnes because I have 2 yads. Kal v'chomer shomer could be moitzi umachnes. The pasuk I'll call zera zeru asher yizarei that teaches me shomer. I don't need it to teach me that's moitzi umachnes. I know kal v'chomer yad. So again, I would know that would be the makar to teach me that shomer could be mitzdaref. Exhale, Zok the Gemara. So the bottom line is that what was the makar that shomer of Eichlin could be mitzdaref? It was learned out from the pasuk of Al Kol Zera Zerua Asher Yizareya, and the pasuk over there teaches me that Kederech Shabbat, right? The way you go ahead, Kederech Shabbat Neyada Maitzian Lizriya. That's the definition of Eichel. You take a chita b'kli pasa. You don't eat a b'kli pasa, but you would be Zareya it b'kli pasa. Thus, the definition of food as it relates to Tumah would be in that sense. Right? The Gemara, Masked Rabbi Bar Shmuel, Rabbi Yishmael, how did I learn to the Mishnah? Hapitma shall remain mitzdarefes. So we all know what a pitim is, according to some Rishonim. That's what hapitma means. So we'll go. That's the pashut shot, like the pitim of the Esrog. So the pitim of the remain mitzdarefes. It's mitzdaref to the shear of Tumas Eichlin. V'hanetchalai. That's like the fuzz around the pitim area. In mitzdaref. That's not mitzdaref. Right? The Gemara. Why is the pitim mitzdaref? You'll tell me, what do you mean? It's a shomer. The problem is, if the makar to shomer being mitzdaref is the pasuk that says that's the way you plant it. You don't plant a pomegranate by taking the pomegranate with its pitim and putting it in the ground. Says the Vesu, another kash hadetnan. Our Mishnah, however, right of akipa mitzdaref l'tami tumas oichlon. Feit gemami nolon. How do you know it's mitzdaref to mi metama tumas oichlon? What's the kasha? The skin of the basar. What, when you plant basar, right? So that meat should grow in your backyard, you plant it together with your ar. That's obviously not how this works, right? So if that's the point, so again, why is the ar going to be mitzdaref? So how could the drush or the makar that shomer is mitzdaref is asher yizareya kederech shebnei adam maitziyim lizriya? It just doesn't stem. I mean, it works for a chita b'kli pasa. I mean, there are examples of how it's going to work. But what about the pitim from the rimai? Or what about the skin that's on your meat? So the Gemara says, Ella tlasa kroik. See, you have to say the makar something else. It says, I'll call zera zeru asher yizareya chad l'shomer d'zra'im v'chad l'shomer d'ilanois idach l'shomer basar ubeitzim v'dagim. It says the word zera 3 times in that pasuk. Kol zera 1, zerua 2, asher yizareya 3. One is coming to teach me this type of shomer d'zra'im, shomer d'ilanois, shomer d'basar, beitzim v'dagim. We will stop here.